So, welcome everyone. My name is Dominic Frongillo. I'm co-founder and executive director of Elected Officials to Protect America. We are a network of state and local elected officials across the country on climate and the environment. You are here for our webinar on existing building electrification in New York State for elected officials, policy innovators, and others working to make a difference. So just a little bit of background about Elected Officials to Protect America. As I said, we are a network of state and local elected officials across the country focused on solving the climate emergency, protecting our lands, waters, and democracy, and ensuring environmental justice. We were founded in 2012 as Elected Officials to Protect New York, here in New York State, to successfully help defend the state from fracking. We have several folks on the call, both speakers and folks in the audience who are active on that issue and continued working ever since then. Our core principles are public stewardship, that we believe that elected officials are publicly entrusted to steward our communities and our democracy and our future. Courageous leadership, that when extraordinary challenges like the climate emergency or environmental injustice or public health crises come along, that it's up to us as public servants to step up courageously to lead. And lastly, collective power, that we believe that we working together across jurisdictions, across cities, towns, villages, counties, states, and countries, we can work together, we can help create the collective power that we need to turn the tide on these issues. So as I said, those are the three areas that we work in. And in terms of some of the opportunities, if you haven't had an opportunity with us before to learn about some of the work that we do, you can think of our work in three arenas. The first on the education side, so we have a certificate in public leadership as well as a master's degree in public leadership, and that's focused on emotional intelligence, body language, negotiations, values-based communication, empathy-based fundraising, a lot of skill sets that we may not get as elected officials in candidate training or in governance school. And we also have, as part of that, a policy prize, and it's a policy incubator. We've had, out of that, policy teams come together and form Hawaii mental health and climate resilience legislation that was first in the nation, as well as a energy security Marshall Plan for Ukraine that just went through the UK Parliament as an early day motion. So it's pretty exciting to see the policies that our elected official members come up with going through the certificate. And we also have a master's program. The master's is free for any veterans or veterans' families. We also have a media and storytelling arm. So we have a film production arm led by award-winning journalist Anna Day. So I do a lot of media production. If you need support with videos, let us know. We have a news magazine that goes out to 25,000 state and local elected officials across the country. So if you would like to share an op-ed or some of the interesting policy work that you're working on, please let us know. We're happy to get that out and share the amazing work that you're doing with other elected officials around the country. We also have a podcast run by elected officials, City Climate Corner, and a book publishing arm through our parent nonprofit, the Solon Center for Research and Publishing, with over 70 mission-driven books. So if you have a book in you or know someone that does, let us know. And lastly, what we're most known for in many ways is our policy and advocacy work. We work locally, statewide, nationally, and internationally, as I mentioned, the Energy Security Marshall Plan, and send delegations to the UN climate negotiations as well. It just came back from Baku in Azerbaijan. Nationally, working on a federal climate emergency plan, also a task force with the Department of Energy focused on IRA, Inflation Reduction Act implementation, getting those funds to communities. State work ranging from building electrification, which we're talking about today, offshore wind, phasing out oil and gas, to local work, as we'll be talking about today. And so we also have leadership councils and an elected official fellowship program. So if you're interested in diving in and really organizing on a policy area that you're passionate about that aligns with our mission, let us know. And we provide staff support and stipends to be able to work together with peer-to-peer organizing, because that's the core of our work. So with no further ado, would love to introduce our speakers for today's webinar on existing building electrification. The purpose, again, being this briefing is for really bringing together discussing the opportunities and the challenges and the policies and some of the success stories, as well as the available financial incentives to bring building electrification to life in New York. We know that building electrification is important because the burning of fossil fuels, the gas and oil in homes or in nearby communities significantly worsens the indoor air quality and pollution and harms our public health. So buildings represent in New York 1/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions. So it's absolutely critical that we tackle this as a state, and communities can really lead the way. So with no further ado, we'll go to our first speaker, Jessica Azulay, the Executive Director of the Alliance for a Green Economy. Agree, Jessica, the floor is yours.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. And thanks to everybody for attending. I'm just going to quickly pull up my slides. Give me 1 second here. Okay. I think you can probably see that. The slideshow going.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Just very quickly about Alliance for a Green Economy. We're a New York State-based organization working to bring renewable energy to New York in all sectors. So not just the electric sector, but also the building and transportation sectors, with a real focus on a just transition and making sure that we're safeguarding people's health and the environment. So I want to give a little bit of an overview of, where we're going here in New York State and what the benefits are, just so you can kind of ground, your understanding of the building electrification and building decarbonization in kind of a bigger policy landscape. So just a reminder that in 2019, New York passed a landmark climate law, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, also known as the Climate Act by short, or CLICPA as some people call it. And it mandates that we get to 70% renewable electricity by 2030 and zero emissions electricity by 2040. But also very importantly, it sets economy-wide greenhouse gas reduction mandates. 40% greenhouse gas reductions across the entire economy by 2030 and 85% reductions by 2050. And I think it's important to understand at the outset, as we work toward achieving that goal, where our energy comes from today. So this is a cool map-ish thing that NYSERDA created that just kind of shows visually where our energy is coming from in New York and how we're using it. So on the left side, you'll see all these different energy sources. And you can see that by far, the biggest energy sources we're using in New York are natural gas or fracked gas, and then petroleum products, which covers oil, gasoline, and diesel, kerosene, et cetera. So those are our biggest things that we're using across the economy in New York. And then you can see we have some other smaller sources, including solar and wind down at the bottom. And then in the middle, you can see that how much of that is going to electricity generation and what our sources are for electricity generation. And you can see, for instance, that in the fracked gas or natural gas arena, about 1/3 is going to generate electricity, and the other 2/3 are going, if you look kind of in the middle there, going to commercial, industrial, and residential buildings. And what's happening is then we're burning that gas in our buildings for heating, hot water, cooking, clothes drying, et cetera. And then you can see the petroleum products, most of that is going to the transportation sector, that we're burning that stuff in our cars and buses. So also all the way on the right, I think it's important to point out how much of that energy is getting lost. About 2/3 of it actually kind of escapes as waste heat and doesn't get used for actual energy generation of any kind. And this is just because of the laws of thermodynamics when you burn stuff. So that's just kind of an overview of where we're getting our energy and how we're using it in New York. And then in terms of what that means in greenhouse gases, 1/3 of our greenhouse gases are coming from all that combustion in buildings. almost another third from combustion in cars and buses. 13% of our greenhouse gases are in the electricity sector, and so on. So then how do we get rid of all that, all those greenhouse gases, and achieve our climate goals? The internationally, there's a general consensus when people have looked at this that in general, what we have to do is follow this pathway. And because we have such a short amount of time to dramatically reduce our greenhouse gases, this is not a 1, 2, 3, 4 step-by-step thing. This is do all of this at once. So first, energy efficiency, reducing how much waste we have, and conservation, tightening up our buildings, using energy efficient appliances, et cetera, to reduce how much energy we need. And then for all that combustion in our buildings and transportation, we need to electrify those and move from appliances that burn things or vehicles that burn things to appliances that run efficiently on electricity, and vehicles that run efficiently on electricity. So that's electric vehicles, heat pumps, et cetera. And then we need to power all of that stuff with renewable energy, cleaning up our grid, getting all that combustion out of the grid. And then because the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine, using storage and other sources and resources to balance out the system to make sure that we have a reliable electricity supply. So that's the general concept. And just again, reviewing kind of what those when we talk about electrifying everything, we're talking about electric vehicles, but also electric public transportation, heat pumps, ground source and air source heat pumps for our heating and hot water needs, and then electric or induction cooking for our cooking needs. And a question that we get a lot is, if our electricity supply isn't clean, if it's not fully renewable and so we're still burning gas to make electricity, what happens when we electrify? Aren't we just like moving from gas to gas? And this is something that is really important to remember, is when you move to heat pumps, they're extremely efficient. For 1 unit of electricity, for a ground source heat pump, you can get 4 units of energy, because what you're doing is moving energy with that electricity. And so on the left, I have a chart here that looks at, if you're burning gas in your furnace to heat your home, and your furnace is 95% efficient, there on the left, that gray bar is how many pounds of carbon CO2 you're emitting from that. And then if you move to a cold climate heat source, even a heat pump or a ground source heat pump, even if your electricity supply was 100% gas, which it's not in New York, not at all, but even if it were, you would still be reducing the greenhouse gases from heating, because of those appliances are so efficient. And then as you move to a 50-50 split between gas and renewables, the reduction is even more. And as we completely decarbonize the grid, those emissions would go down to 0. So just wanted to kind of answer that question that we get a lot. I'm going to skip that slide just for time, but our in New York, to implement the climate law, we have a overall climate action plan that was developed by something called the Climate Action Council, which was a bunch of appointees from the governor and the legislature, and they went through a 2-year public process of talking with experts, putting out drafts, taking public comment, revising, doing a ton of analysis to develop some recommendations and a pathway for how we achieve our climate goals. They developed a few different pathways. They're all pretty similar. I just have one of them here on the slide. They don't change very much among them, actually, but as you can see in this slide, what we're doing is dramatically reducing our greenhouse gases by electrifying our buildings and our transportation, trying to move toward all new sales of heating equipment and vehicles in the 2030 and 2035 range, being electric vehicles and electric heating, and then cleaning up our electric grid. So our plan is basically to follow that internationally recognized pathway. And there are some incredible benefits for doing this because, obviously it's a huge change. And there's a lot of questions about how we do this and is it the right move and how much is it going to cost? And I think it's really important to remember that the cost of inaction, the cost of just letting climate change run wild, and all the damage that that does far exceeds the investments needed to achieve these goals. And so the cost of inaction exceeds the cost of action by about 115 billion in New York. And there are other substantial benefits that come from making this transition. Health benefits from reducing combustion, because that combustion doesn't just release greenhouse gases, it also releases criteria pollutants, NOx and SOx, and that impacts our health. So we can save 50 to 110 billions just on healthcare costs by improving our air quality. We're going to add hundreds of thousands of new jobs, especially in the building sector as we electrify. We are also going to keep more dollars in New York State because most of our energy dollars, over half, are leaving the state as we pay for fossil fuels. By generating our electricity in state and by moving to appliances that we're installing and making our homes more efficient, we're going to keep more of our energy dollars in the state. And then I just want to end by talking a little bit about how local leaders can engage in this transition. It's really important that that local leaders engage, as the state is, as Lisa's going to talk about after me, there's a bunch of different pieces of legislation that have been enacted or are being considered. And local electeds talking about local needs and the benefits that we want to bring to our communities with state elected officials can be a really critical tool, including the governor and senators and assembly members. There's also great opportunities for intervention in Public Service Commission proceedings, where a Public Service Commission is creating a lot of programs and funding for renewable energy and thermal energy networks and energy efficiency. Hosting community events so that you can get information like this out to your residents, speaking to the media, and then, looking to host renewable energy and thermal energy networks in your community. And I just want to end talking about a resource that is available in all regions of the state. NYSERDA has created clean energy hubs regionally all over the state, where there are energy advisors to help your residents and your communities make this transition in their homes, and also to engage with local municipalities around their options for transitioning their own buildings, and helping their residents transition and developing programs locally. So with that, I will pass it over to Lisa, I believe, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Dominic, do you want me to just go ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll just wanted to
Can't hear you. Sorry.
Yeah.
We can hear you, Dominic.
Just wanted to thank Jessica for your comments, and that's pretty startling statistic that the cost of inaction will exceed the cost of action by $115 billion in New York, and we can keep these dollars circulating in our local economy. So thank you for sharing that overview of the state policy landscape. Before we go to our next speaker, just a note, I see some questions coming in. Yes, we will share the slides afterwards. If you have any questions at all as we go along in the webinar, please just put your questions in the chat, the Q&A, and we'll make sure we get to them at the end, if not before. So with no further ado, go to our next speaker, Alicia Marshall, who's Advocacy and Organizing Director with New Yorkers for Clean Power, who will talk with us about what's the current landscape in New York and some of the local policies and some of the legislation as well. So with that, we'll hand it over to Lisa.
Thanks so much, Dominic. Thank you for having me, and hello, everybody. I'm also now going to share my screen. As Dominic said, I'm Director of Organizing and Advocacy at New Yorkers for Clean Power. And the main part of that job is, I guess I'm sort of the lead organizer for a campaign called Renewable Heat Now that is made up of over 20 organizations working together to move forward building electrification and decarbonization policy in New York, and as well as doing education and outreach about those issues. And, Dominic's talked about how a lot of us got started with the whole idea of banning fracking. Well, today I think is the 10th anniversary of the fracking ban, or an anniversary of the fracking ban, and that is such an incredible achievement. But New York remains one of the biggest users of fracked gas to date, and that use is only accelerating. So Renewable Heat Now is really working on the solutions. Instead of saying no to something, we're saying yes to something else that will replace the use of fracked gas over the coming decades. And I was going to ask for the next slide, but then I realized I'm controlling my slides. So as Jessica pointed out, buildings are the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions in New York. And that's because in New York, we don't just count the combustion emissions when we burn the gas at the end in the furnace or at the flame tip. We actually count the whole journey of the gas from when it's fracked out of the Marcellus Shale fracking fields in Pennsylvania, moved along pipelines, all the way along. Methane gas is always leaking, and methane has a really dramatic warming effect, especially during the first 10 years that it's in the atmosphere. And the way New York accounts for that now, because of advocates like us on this call, is the correct accounting. And that's really why we can recognize the incredible impact of burning methane gas, or so-called natural gas, in our buildings. And that's why we work so hard to forward these policy solutions. So since the Climate Act was passed in 2019, just like Jessica talked about, and since the Climate Action Council put out the final climate plan that Jessica explained, we have been working to actually implement that plan. And unfortunately, part of what that means is we have to pass more legislation. So we've been busily passing more legislation. And these are the sort of 4 keynote bills that we've passed since 2019. The Utility Thermal Energy Networks and Jobs Act. This allows, this actually directs the utilities to build some pilot projects around the state of neighborhood scale building decarbonization. We also passed a geothermal tax credit, state tax credit. So if you put geothermal into your house, you can take 25% or up to $5,000 off the cost on your next New York state taxes. We also passed a wonky bill called the Building Codes and Appliance Standards. This really means that as we develop new codes and standards in New York, we have to take into account the greenhouse gas emissions. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And this one you've probably heard of, the All Electric Building Act, which says that new buildings starting in 2026 for most buildings, and then in 2029 for buildings over 7 stories, will have to be all electric. So that means that they will not be connected to the gas system, and the appliances, heating, etc., will be heat pumps and efficient electric appliances. So these have been really exciting milestones to pass and got us sort of off to a good start. And unfortunately, we still have a ways to go. So here's our legislative priorities coming up and our regulatory priorities, because a lot of the way this policy moves forward is not through legislation, it's through the regulatory processes. Our keynote bill, our highest priority, is the so-called New York Heat Act, the Home Energy Affordable Transition Act, which I'm going to go into in more detail. The GAP Fund Act, which is the Green Affordable Pre-Electrification Fund. This is a fund that is so important because we have really some pretty good incentives for home energy efficiency and electrification, but so many buildings don't qualify for those programs because they have sort of the building equivalent of a pre-existing condition. So they're not in good enough shape in one way or another. Maybe they have mold, maybe they have asbestos, maybe their wiring is outdated, maybe there's a hole in the roof. Any number of reasons can mean a building can't move forward to weatherize and electrify. And so this fund creates a fund to fix some of those problems in conjunction with doing that work. We have, there's a campaign called Upgrade New York, which is pretty exciting. And it might be really relevant to some of you who live in the areas where these state facilities are. This is the idea that the state should lead the way by electrifying the top 15 most carbon polluting state facilities. So these might be like some of the SUNY campuses, the Capitol complex, et cetera. This isn't a Renewable Heat Now campaign, but it's one that we strongly support and think is a high priority for the state. And then, and I'm sorry, this slide is really boring and and intense, but I'm happy to provide information about all these things in links later. The regulatory proceedings that we are involved in, and these are sort of in order, sort of what we're focused on. Our top focus is on something called the New Efficiency New York proceeding, also known as NENI, also known as EEBE, which stands for Energy Efficiency and Building Electrification. And that is actually $5 billion that's already been allocated. So the money is there. And what we are involved in is working with the Public Service Commission to reimagine and improve how these funds are spent. That we've already had a few years of this program, and we found that the way the money is being spent is not ideal. So we're really working hard to try to make sure the money is spent in the best way possible and gets into the hands of the people who need it. You've probably heard of New York Cap and Invest, also known as NICI. This came from the governor's office at the end of the Climate Act process of creating the climate plan. It's an idea to raise billions of dollars by basically taxing polluters and then taking that money and investing in people and communities and in climate mitigation and in reduction of climate emissions. And this policy, even though it came from the governor's office originally, is in jeopardy now of being not moved forward or of being weakened dramatically, so it wouldn't really work. And so we're working on that. There's the building energy codes. That is very sort of urgently coming up. The Codes Council actually canceled their December meeting where they were going to put out the next building code and postponed it to January 16th. There is a rumor that the governor is trying to push back the dates for the all electric buildings through this energy code process, claiming that, that was passed before the pandemic and everything's different now. So that's a place where we have to watch what's going to happen, and that's going to affect all your municipalities. As you know, there's always the code and the stretch code, and your code officers need to be trained, and you need to get the information out to builders and developers and other people building buildings in your community. So that's an important process to watch. I'm just going to quickly name the rest. The Climate Action Plan, as Jessica said, we have to reduce emissions 40% from all sectors, but it didn't specify how that accounting should be done. And that's really been left to the state agencies like the DEC to do. And here we are, years later, it's almost 2025 and they still haven't done that. And what this impacts is when we're trying to work with utilities on their plans for how to raise money from all of us and how to spend it. And we're saying, well, you can't really raise money and spend it on more gas infrastructure. They say, well, there's nothing in the law that says we can't. So this is very important. There's also a new state energy plan going to be proposed and finalized in the coming year. And there's going to be hearings all over the state, an opportunity to comment on that plan. And all of these above things are going to come into that energy plan. So that's a really important process. Also, the gas planning, all the utilities are doing gas planning one at a time. And that's something that we're involved in an ongoing basis. And that might be something that a municipality should be, or other elected official might want to pay attention to if when your utility is the one that has to put in a plan, being involved in that. And the same with rate cases. That's when utilities go to the Public Service Commission and ask to charge more money, and they have to say what they're going to spend it on. This is a great place for public officials and municipalities to get involved. That really, really impacts the people. And where you live on the ground in terms of the rates that they pay for energy. All right, I'm going to use my remaining time to talk more about our signature bill, the New York Heat Act, which is our highest priority bill. We're very, very focused on getting this passed this year in the state budget. And we came so close last year that it was just absolutely heartbreaking. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it and why it's so important. So our tagline for this is cleaner heat, lower bills, because that's what the bill does. It has three key components. It changes utility law. Right now, utility law in New York says the utilities have to provide gas to everybody in their territory. That's what we call the gas mandate. It doesn't allow utilities actually to use our money to provide us with the heat pumps and home energy efficiency solutions that we know that we need to switch to from gas. They are doing that in the thermal energy network pilots, but if they want to do that outside of the pilots, they literally can't because of the law. So this is an incredibly important thing. Imagine all of the gas pipes in New York, and that every utility has plans to dig up those pipes for and put in new gas pipes that will last another 40, 50 years and charge us the money to do that. It's billions and billions of dollars of spending that's planned. And instead, they could be spending all that money on heat pumps and upgrading our homes and our buildings for electrification. So it's absolutely crucial that we end this gas mandate and expand the definition of what the utility service means in New York. A smaller piece is it just ends these subsidies that we are paying for new gas hookups right now. If somebody wants to hook up to the gas system within 100 feet of a gas main, they don't actually have to pay for that. We do. It's paid for on all our utility bills, and that's just a very bad way to raise money and to spend it. So we're ending that and just keeping subsidies for electric hookups and increasing those, but ending the gas hookup subsidy. Very crucially, there's a 6% household limit on utility bills. This is because it's that in New York, about a quarter of our residents are energy burdened. That means they pay more than 6% of their household income on utility bills, or actually energy bills. This should say energy bills. I thought I wrote energy bills. And that is really considered unaffordable. And we all know we have an affordability crisis here in New York, and it's really impacting us at every level of our communities and our politics. So this is something that we can do to really make sure that those bills are kept under control and that people can afford their home energy. The bill, so those are the three key components of the bill, and it also contains a timeline for these proceedings to go forward after the passage of the bill. It contains safeguards for people, say that say they were going to replace a gas pipe and instead give everyone a heat pump. They have to give you several years notice and keep in touch with you. They can't just sort of come one day and unhook you. And they also have funding so that you can get a new stove and a new heat pump in your home and get your home weatherized so the heat pump will work well. All that money that would have been used for gas pipes can be used in people's homes and buildings. And it also has labor protections that to make it, we know we have a lot of organized labor that does gas utility work, and we want those laborers to have the same kinds of protection and work in this energy transition. And I think I'm almost out of time, so just going to quickly say these are sort of our benefits. This is sort of our public facing, what the bill does: cutting costs, upgrading homes, defending our health, and protecting the planet. I'm skipping through these. I thought I hid these. I'm just going to briefly mention that a lot of these priorities were in a letter that was signed by a couple hundred organizations and delivered to the governor earlier this fall for her budget priorities, and I'll share a link to that. And I'll just end by saying that, with a climate denier whose top priority is drill baby drill coming into the White House, we're really looking to leaders in the blue states like Governor Hochul to lead. This is a picture of one of the recent firefighters. We know the climate crisis is here. And this is really my appeal to you. Kathy Hochul was a local elected official. She was a county legislator. She really cares about the local level and what's going on and what you think and what you care about. You're one of the things that we have determined influences her the most. And she is really pushing back on this climate action in little and large ways, just slow walking everything as much as possible. And we really are seeking support from local elected officials to, sign letters, talk to the governor, join on our actions, and be a part, join your voices with our grassroots voices in influencing what this governor decides to do this year and beyond, because we know that your influence on her is quite large and that she cares what you have to say. And that's where I will end.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa, for sharing those thoughts. And yes, pretty startling implications of just how important the policy is in our energy infrastructure, and your comments about whether we going to lock in gas infrastructure for another 40, 50 years when we redo things, or will we go to, as Jessica pointed out, the ridiculous efficiency of heat pumps. We just had a workshop in central New York and Syracuse and got a tour of heat pumps, and just through a fan can very efficiently share energy around. So we need to make sure that the policies, both at the state and local level, catch up with the new technology that's now available that can make things very efficient. So thank you so much, Lisa. We'll move right along, and again, please put any questions in the chat. We'll go to Q&A afterwards. We'll go along to our next speaker, Jacob Goldman, Vice President of Energy Tax Savers, who will give us an overview of, all right, if we want to move these things forward at the local level, what are some of the tax incentives available and some of the strategies for us to make sure that we're increasing prosperity as well as improving public health. So with that, I will hand it over to Jacob.
Thank you. So let's get excited to talk about tax. Woo! The QR code will get you a much longer presentation. So you want to take a shot at that QR code. This presentation is condensed for the time period, but if you want a longer version of the presentation, here is your opportunity to shoot that QR code and get a longer version of the presentation. It creates an email, you hit send, and within 5 minutes, you get that longer presentation. In this presentation, we're going to touch on elective pay, Section 48, which is the IRA enhancements under the alternative energy credits, the enhancements to alternative fuel, the EV charging credits, and then we'll talk about some clean vehicles. And if we have time, we'll talk on prevailing wage and apprenticeship. Last chance to get that QR code. So with that, I'm going to switch to elective pay. So the reason that municipalities can get a tax incentive is because of Section 6417, elective pay. And it incentivizes all these different areas, the alternative energy items and the investment tax credit, the EV charging for the alternative fuel vehicle refueling property, and then it also incentivizes the clean vehicles. 6417 is what allows all these different ways to get a typical tax incentive to municipalities. So the municipalities can get this. And if there's one thing you come away with from this presentation, is that checks have been mailed. We have clients that have received a check for their solar project, have received their check for a ground source project, have received their check for an electric bus. So the checks are flowing and they have been in the mail. And, we have clients that have already received, I think it's $12 million worth of checks so far. And that's only about a third of the ones that we've applied for. So tremendous opportunity now. The checks are flowing. And to do this, for a municipality to get this one of these tax incentives, the first thing you need to know is that you have to pre-register. Pre-registration is required, and you obviously pre-register after your project is placed in service. So you pre-register after your project is placed in service. So you do your project, it's placed in service, you pre-register, get a registration number, you then take that registration number and we help you file the tax returns in order to get your elective pay. what are these incentives available? So there's the investment tax credit or the alternative energy credit. This is where you can get a credit anywhere between 6% and 70%. It's for your solar projects, your wind projects, your ground source projects, your thermal storage projects. Because state and local governments get this incentive, they did put in some haircuts, some things that might reduce the credit. So for example, if you finance with tax-exempt financing, there is a 15% haircut. So where maybe you would have qualified for a 30% credit for your solar, if you use tax-exempt bonds, it drops down to 25.5%. So there is a haircut for tax-exempt bonds. There is another haircut, and it depends on what year you started your project. So if you started your project in 2024, there could be a 10% haircut. If you started in 2025, there could be a 15% haircut. If you start in 2026, there could be a 100% haircut, kind of like a head cut. But there's two ways to avoid this second haircut. So one way is by being a small project. So if your project is under a megawatt, under 3.4 million BTUs per hour, or under 284 tons of cooling, there is no haircut. There's no 10%, there's no 15%, there's no 100%. But if you're bigger than that, the only way to meet the requirement to avoid the haircut is the domestic content. You need to meet domestic content rules. And come 2026, if you start your project in 2026 and you're bigger than the megawatt, you're going to have to meet domestic content, or there is no tax credit whatsoever. So another thing that's incentivized is the EV charging. It is either a 6% credit or a 30% credit. The way it becomes a 30% credit is if you meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship on the install. EV charging is not available everywhere. It is only available in certain areas of the country, and we'll show you a map of that a little later. It could be limited, the 6% or the 30%, to $100,000 per charger. That's per plug, per plugging unit. So you can go up to 100,000. It's the lesser of $100,000 or 6%, or $100,000 or 30%. And then the last one is for your electric vehicles. If you have a small vehicle that's less than 14,000 pounds, could be a $7,500 credit. Bigger vehicles like electric buses could be a $40,000 credit. So very valuable for those types of projects. So here's the list of all the technologies for the investment tax credit for the alternative energy credits. Starts at 6%. You do the right things, your 6% can turn to 30, your 30 can turn to 40, your 40 can turn into 50. And for solar and wind, if you get the low income bonus, which is something you have to apply for, it could turn to 60 or 70. So very powerful legislation. Ground source, for example, if you qualify for the 5-time bonus domestic content and energy community, it's a half-off sale, 2 for 1, a BOGO. Buy one, get one free. Same is true with thermal storage, where you're making ice at night and cooling your building with the ice during the day. You can get all the way up to 50%, half-off sale, BOGO. Buy one, get one free. 5-time bonus, there's 2 ways to qualify. One way is by being under a megawatt, under 284 tons cooling, 3.4 million BTUs heating. Or if you're bigger than a megawatt, once again, meeting prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. Another bonus, domestic content bonus. This is a 2% bonus, but if you meet the 5-time bonus rules, it turns into a 10% bonus. There's 2 requirements there. One requirement is that 100% of your structural steel and iron on the eligible project cost, not on your total project, just the eligible project cost. So for example, if you're doing a solar project on a new construction building, the structural steel is the racking system on the solar panels, not the columns and beams in your building. So it's only on the eligible project cost, has to be 100% domestic on structural steel and iron. And then for every manufactured product of the eligible project cost, depending on what year you start construction, you have to meet a 40% or all the way up to a 50% made in the USA requirement for manufactured product. But wait, there's more. There's another bonus. There's the energy community bonus. It is a 2% bonus that turns into a 10% bonus if you meet 5-time bonus rules. If you just jot down this URL, you'll be able to see the map of what qualifies. You don't really need to do that. Just do the QR code and we'll send you it. But here's what the map looks like. So in New York State, The green areas are are permanent. So a little outside of Syracuse, a little bit in Buffalo, a little bit on Lake Ontario up here. Those are permanent. For the entire length of the legislation, you would get that bonus. The purple areas might go on and off. They're based on employment levels. So if unemployment drops in these areas, if they don't have higher than average unemployment, then those purple areas will disappear. But right now, up until May, if you do a project, if you start your project in one of these purple areas, you know, this southern tier, that project will be grandfathered to get this bonus, the energy community bonus. EV charging, as I mentioned, 6%, 30% if you do prevailing wage and apprenticeship. But what my point here is that it's not available everywhere. So where is it not available? It turns out it's not available in the suburbs. So you kind of see around Rochester, the whitish area. The gray would qualify, but the whitish area would not. You know, this Westchester, it tends to be the wealthier suburbs. If you're in a wealthier suburb, that is not an eligible place to do an EV charging. Most of the state EV charging gets this elective pay, but some suburbs, there is no elective pay for those suburbs. So it really depends. And once again, there's a URL here, and you can go right to this map. The map actually has a search option. You can type in an address, zoom all the way in, and you can determine specifically if your project qualifies or not. The clean vehicles, it's dependent on weight. There's some other requirements, but some other possible cuts. But in general, almost every vehicle that's under 14,000 gets a 7,500, and almost every vehicle above 14,000 gets 40,000. There could be just a handful of vehicles that don't, but pretty much every vehicle in those categories get the full 7,500 or 40,000. So prevailing wage and apprenticeship is that extra requirement. Prevailing wage can be found on this website, sam.gov. The sam.gov website. It's a federal prevailing wage. It's Davis-Bacon prevailing wage. For apprenticeship, there's 4 requirements. There's the labor hour requirement, where 15% of total labor has to come from apprentices. There's the participation requirement, where, hold on one sec. There's a participation requirement where if you have 4 or more workers on any contractor or subcontractor, one of them has to be an apprentice. You have to meet all these requirements, by the way. And then there's a daily ratio requirement. They don't want a bunch of apprentices running around unsupervised. So there's an apprentice to journey worker ratio that has to be met every day on the project. All your apprentices have to come from registered apprenticeship programs. That list is on the federal list or it's on the state list. With that, I'll just put up the QR codes again. The one on the right gets you the slides. The one on the left gets you my contact information. And I know we're supposed to go into a discussion period.
Yes, thank you so much, Jacob. Very impressive. And yes, we'll make sure we get the haircut and not the head cut, or preferably no haircut at all. Thank you so much for laying out those impressive incentives that municipalities can take advantage of. And yes, please do follow up with Jacob with any specific questions. So we will go to Q&A right now. We have about 5 minutes for Q&A and open discussion. So take a look at some of the questions here. One question is a specific question for the 6% limit, I believe, on the New York heat policy. How is that enforced, and do residents have to fill out paperwork? Is it connected to taxes? How does that 6% work?
Lisa, do you want me to take this one?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and Jessica's had her head in the actual law a lot recently, so I'm gonna have her take that.
Okay, great. It's a really good question. And the answer is probably going to be a little bit insufficient at this moment, which is that when New York Heat is passed, the Public Service Commission will be tasked with planning how to achieve that 6% goal. So we don't know exactly how it will shake out, but I can say a little bit about how it's done now. So New York does have a goal. The Public Service Commission has set a goal that households shouldn't pay more than 6% of their income on energy. That's a pre-existing goal that we're trying to codify in state law and really push the commission to fully implement. So there is an energy affordability program now that comes out of that goal. The problem is that only about half of the people who need help on their energy bills are receiving it through that program. And the way it's done now is, no, you do not have to provide your income to the utility. Most of the people in the program are automatically enrolled because they receive HEAP or some other assistance where they have already income qualified with a different state agency or local agency, and then they're just automatically enrolled in the energy affordability program at their utility. The problem is that the existing programs and existing policy are not fully achieving the 6% goal. We are seeing, for instance, in upstate New York and National Grid territory, there are pockets where households are paying more than 25% of their very low income on energy, which is truly atrocious and unaffordable. So our hope is that by codifying the 6% goal in the law and requiring the Public Service Commission to develop a plan to achieve it, that will improve enrollment in that program and will find other strategies for achieving that goal, such as targeting energy efficiency to the most needy households, because so many of them are living in housing stock that's uninsulated, and they could really reduce their energy bills by insulating and get to the root of the problem. So there's many, many different strategies for achieving the goal, and the short answer is we'll have to figure it out exactly how once we pass the bill.
Yeah, I have something to add to that, Jessica. That is exactly such a good answer. But I will say that in anticipation of this law passing, there was a pilot launched in New York looking at 1,000 low-income households that electrified and enrolling them in an energy affordability guarantee program for these 1,000 households that have put in heat pumps that are low income. So they're going to be getting enrollment into that program to these 1,000 households and collecting data and figuring out sort of a mechanism from that will sort of be help to inform these agencies when we do pass the New York Heat Act this year, as they work out what the process is going to be. Because one of the things that we are very, very concerned about is sort of the level of difficulty and barriers to entry to a lot of the good programs that we already have. And we don't want to make that worse with a new policy or program. We want to make it better. We want to make it more accessible, cut the paperwork, get more people in the door, more money out into people's pockets and communities. So this is something we'll be attending closely to after the law is passed, and we're already sort of working with these state agencies to be thinking ahead for when this does pass.
Amazing, thank you. So we'll go to our next question, which is, are there other examples of successful existing building electrification policies or programs in other states or other jurisdictions that New York State can learn from?
There's no state that has passed something as comprehensive as New York Heat, but there are states that have done some pretty good things, including some better policy planning for utilities. There's Washington State's electric code. There's Maryland that has done some very good planning. There's Massachusetts that is quite forward thinking there and trying to eliminate the gas subsidy as amongst other things. There's California, where they are trying to move ahead with replacing pipelines with electrification, but they have a very strict set of criteria where that's allowed, and so on. So there are people, not Jessica and I, who are closely following what's happening in all of the states. We try not to ever think about anything except New York. But when we pass New York Heat, I will say proudly that it is sort of the most comprehensive and sort of holistic approach that any state has taken to tackling these problems. Maybe that's one reason it's been hard to pass, because the bill is ambitious and tries to do so much. But we really feel like all the pieces work well together, and that passing it piecemeal would, might have some unintended consequences that we wouldn't want to see. So we're excited to pass the whole the whole bill for that reason and really lead the nation in a certain way.
Great, thank you, Lisa. All right, I think we have time for one more question, and what the question is, what surprising trends or other opportunities have you seen? I think this is for you, Jacob, that you've seen in terms of incentives that we could be providing on the tax side that we're not providing yet. So I know that's kind of integrating the question on the what are the current incentives and what are the policies that we need to have. I guess that's for all three of you. What other incentives should we be pushing for at the state that we don't have?
Yeah, I don't know that I have an answer for that. I do know that with the current administration, there is some concern that some of the incentives that we now have might disappear. I would counter that it looks like there's enough Republican support that there might be some reversals, but there's not going to be widespread reversals, is our belief at this time. But we'll know a lot more in the next 130 days or so.
Yeah, I'd like to add that both in New York and at the federal level, if we made these tax credits fully refundable, they would be accessible to a lot more people. Making it a tax credit that isn't refundable means you have to be high enough income to owe tax. And that's a real limitation for who can access these funds. And basically, it's a really big subsidy that can only go to higher income households. So moving any tax credits to being fully refundable. That you notice that the tax credits that they gave to the fossil fuel companies are refundable, but not the ones they gave to people. So maybe we maybe don't have a chance to change that right now at the federal level, but we certainly could do that in New York State.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We're nearing the end of the time of our webinar, so we'll just wrap up here with a few closing words and some opportunities for next steps. So first of all, really thank our speakers. It's been really great and inspiring, and to see the overview going from what's the policy landscape to what are the gaps right now in the state policies to how can we make this happen locally and as municipalities benefit from it. Being elected to office myself in Caroline, New York, knowing just how important those dollars are to make sure that we're spending our tax dollars in a way that is good for us as a municipality right now and for future generations as well. So we have some opportunities to stay involved. We just wrapped up a Central New York building electrification webinar with many of our same speakers who are fantastic. We will be sending out the recording to those that are interested. So if you are interested in that, just shoot us a note or put a note in the chat here. We also are planning future events as well. So if you're interested in hosting one locally in your region of the state, please let us know. Next is just a few opportunities to sign on some letters of ours. And the first is on our New York Climate Superfund Act. So we talked a lot about the health and environmental consequences of gas and oil. We have an opportunity to help make sure that oil and gas companies are paying for the climate damages that they're causing to our municipalities across the state. So I just dropped that link in the chat if you're interested. Right now it's on the governor's desk and there's a big push. This would be, it was the first introduced in the nation, and we have the opportunity to really lead the nation here. California's also introduced a similar bill. Second is, I see our colleagues at Safe Cities are on the line here. We co-lead the network of elected officials and staff with Safe Cities. So we are putting in a note there. If you're interested in learning more about how you can work on local policies to protect public health and phase out fossil fuels, check out that link with Safe Cities, and we'll see you on our monthly calls. And last but not least, in terms of how do we generate the clean energy that we need to power the building electrification, offshore wind, we have a letter going with over 175 elected officials across the state to move forward responsible offshore wind development. So we'd love your support in moving that forward as well. So with that, we will share these slides and the recording afterwards for you to share with your colleagues as well. Again, thank you to all of our participants and to our speakers and for all of the work that you do on a daily basis in public service to transition our state to a healthier, more prosperous, and cleaner world for all. All right, thank you so much, and we'll be in touch. And happy holidays if we don't see each other until then. Take care.